Welcome to the Boswell Book Company virtual event series, co-hosted today by Celtic Milwaukee. To say a few words from Celtic Milwaukee, I'd like to introduce Patrick Fitzgibbons. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, Celtic MKE's mission really is to promote all things Irish, Irish American, and Celtic. And certainly we appreciate the fact that Boswell has supported several Irish writers a few weeks ago. Michelle Gallen was on, enjoyed that very much. Today is going to be a very special for me. Leonard and Hungary Paul was really my favorite book of 2020, and learned about it through Listowel Writers Week, which is a wonderful festival in Kerry. Leonard and Hungary Paul was shortlisted for the Kerry Irish Novel of the Year. So I had to read it, and it's excellent, and I'm very much looking forward to this.
I'd like to introduce, and here was the part where I was supposed to say to you, Mr. Hession, could you please pronounce your first name for me? Because I'm very good at putting in the accents, and I listened, but I'm still nervous.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks very much for having me, and thank you, Patrick, for those kind words about the book too. But Daniel, it's a pleasure to be here. My first name is pronounced Rónán, and the pronunciation guide I normally give people is that it rhymes with turn your phone on. So that will hopefully help you remember. But I don't take offense. It's an Irish name. It's an Irish word, actually. It's the Irish word for a baby seal. So a roan is a seal and a Rónán is a baby seal. So a bit of trivia there too.
Well, welcome virtually to Milwaukee. You mentioned that this, I mean, they're all the same, but this is actually your first sort of official virtual United States bookstore event. So we're really honored to be part of that. So with that said, we at the bookstore, and in particular, are obsessed with Leonard and Hungary Paul. We're on Team L&HP or something, I don't know. I have to come up with something cleverer than that. And this book has been a passion project for me. And I do a lot of these, but I'm still really nervous talking to you. But so I know how to calm me down, and that's to say, would you do the very short introduction to the book and maybe read a page or two for us?
Sure, my pleasure. And thanks to everybody for coming to the event today. And thank you, Daniel, for having me. Just to explain, yeah, Leonard and Hungary Paul, for people who haven't read the book, and I have the UK/Irish edition, you'll have the beautiful US edition if you have it now. There it is. It's a book quite simply about gentle people. It's a story about a group of people who are in all different ways are struggling with the balance between engaging with the world without becoming overwhelmed by it. It's about people who tend to be overlooked in life, sort of quieter people, and sort of looks at what do we have to learn from that way of life and that way of living. So I was going to begin by reading an extract from the first chapter, which is quite simply called Leonard. Leonard was raised by his mother alone with cheerfully concealed difficulty, his father having died tragically during childbirth. Though she was not by nature the soldiering type, she taught him to look at life as a daisy chain of small events, each of which could be made manageable in its own way. She was a person for whom kindness was a very ordinary thing, who believed that the only acceptable excuse for not having a bird feeder in the back garden was that you had one in the front garden. As sometimes happened with boys who prefer games to sports, Leonard had few friends, but lots of ideas. His mother understood with intuitive good sense that children like Leonard just need someone to listen to them. They would set off to the shops discussing conger eels and have a deep conversation about Saturn's moons on the way back. They would talk about tidal waves at bath time and say goodnight with a quick chat with the man with the longest fingernails in the Guinness Book of World Records. But Leonard grew up at a time when quiet, imaginative children did not yet enjoy the presumption of innocence. His mother often found herself having to take his side against ornery teachers who complained that they found it impossible to get through to him. With patient maternal endurance, she would sit by herself at parent-teacher meetings, explaining that, like his late father, he just lacked a eureka face. Even into his 30s, Leonard's mother still liked to fuss over him, buying his favourite ham for lunch, the one with fewer veins running through it, leaving tea by the bedside for when he woke up, and ironing well-meaning creases into his jeans, which Leonard would quietly iron out later. He repaid her thoughtfulness by keeping her company through her later years, and generally including her in the uncrowded bandwidth of his life. She had never really asked Leonard about girls, knowing the delicacy of the subject for him, and also because of her own doubts about whether his apparently celibate life was due to a lack of interest or opportunity. For Leonard, the fact that he still lived at home with his mother led to a certain self-restraint on practical grounds. He had wondered what would have happened had he brought a girl home only for them to wake up to 2 cups of tea at the bedside the next morning. His mother passed away unexpectedly one midweek night in her sleep, tucked into a duvet with her clothes all laid out for the next day, her neatness being a sign of her respect for the small things in her life. The doctor noted the cause of death as a heart attack, but emphasized that there were no signs of suffering or drama. He said that her heart must have simply run out of beats. So Daniel, I'll pause there.
You know, the book does open sort of with the death, ends with something else, but you really, Leonard's relationship with his mother just sort of seeps through the whole book. Like she's there, she's not there, and yet you just feel her presence. You write her so powerfully. Did you know she was going to be, like, it's almost like you wrote all this backstory for it. It leads me into the question of what was you talked about thematically what you wanted to write about, but like what, in terms of these characters, like who was the first character who came to your head? What was their original origin? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the beginning of the book, and bearing in mind I didn't set out to write a book, was that I was getting flashes of the character who became Leonard. I felt to some extent I was pregnant with Leonard. I more and more got a feeling for him. And when I initially sat down to understand this character, my background really was in music. So I was used to writing music, but I'd taken a break from that and put it behind me, really, with creativity behind me, in fact. So I said I'd get to know him, and I'd write a little bit about him every day. And by the second day, I decided, you know what, forget it. I'm going to try and write a book. And what I found, for some writers, I think they like to plan out a character. They like to know lots of backstory. They will like to know every detail about them in order to really make them realistic. I have found a different approach that works for me, which is I like to use the novel to discover the character. I like to, in the same way that you can meet somebody and have actually quite a close conversation quite quickly without actually knowing the facts and circumstances of their life. So my sense was we had somebody here who was inwardly sad, I think, who was going from one steady state in transition to another steady state. And somebody who really was just not going to force himself on the world. And I'd come across people in life like that, where I didn't know much about them, I didn't notice them. And once you notice one person like that, you notice that they're everywhere. And I began to question whether, well, maybe they have the thing that's missing, and what exactly is that? So from there, Leonard, I think I worked out pretty quickly that he needed a foil, someone who was like him, but not necessarily just the anti-Leonard, or not just a variation on him. And then the obvious context for that then was family. But the sense of grief, and I think was just there in the background, a sense of, the first image I think I ever had was of him coming in from work in a melancholy way and taking off his shoes, using the lazy way with one toe taking off the shoe in front, which is an image I later used for Hungry Paul in the book. That was the first idea, somebody slightly sighing after the day coming in. And that set the momentum for the character.
Yeah, I really am, I guess I'm drawn to, as so many readers are, books about grief and overcoming it. One of our other best-selling books of last year, and I don't know how big it was in Ireland, was called Writers and Lovers by Lily King. And it's her mother has died and just died in that book as well. And whereas we don't know the character, she really plays on it. Leonard they're both such great characters. And Leonard reminds me of, I was trying to think, like, who, you know, when I'm describing it to people I'm trying to convince to read the book, like, who is Leonard and who would he compare you to? And I know she's actually pretty popular in the UK and Ireland too, I assume. But he reminds me a little of an Anne Tyler hero. Have you ever read Anne Tyler?
I know she's very famous, but I haven't read her work.
Not just famous, but she's a good writer.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. Yeah, you would find some, you know, some sympatheticness to it, you know, sort of, you know, a little, just in the way that he is sort of reacting to the world, and a little bumbling in a way, you know, and a gentleness of humor. Hungry Paul, I felt that it's not everybody figures out who they think, you know, everybody does this in their head, like this character's like this character. Did you have any inspiration here? I'm not going to even tell you who Hungry Paul reminded you of, because I don't know what you think of it. But did you have any sort of, like, as you were writing the book, inspirations? I know, you know, I always say, you always ask a question, like, who are you in the book as the writer? And you always say, I've already said what you said, which is, I'm none of the characters, and I'm all of the characters. So tell me, like, how, you know, is there a few? Did you think of a person when you were modeling it, or was they completely from imagination with nothing, you know, that's hard to do.
Yeah, they're pretty much imagination. Like the way creativity has always worked for me, it's never been a projection of myself. It's never been a projection of my personality or necessarily of my personal experience. There's a sense of something visiting you, and there's a sort of sense that you have to give it form. And you may draw on some details of your life in order to give it form, but sometimes what I don't work with, and it doesn't really work for me, is to say, you know, I have an Uncle Pat, and I'll make a character out of Uncle Pat, and I'll rebrand him, disguise him a little bit. Sometimes what can inspire a character, for me, it might just be somebody you see in the line for boarding a plane. You know, you're on a plane and you're queuing, and you look ahead, and there's a couple, and you automatically, just by the way they're behaving, they're interacting, you think you know their marriage inside out, just because you have nothing better to do than sit and watch them for 5 minutes. And sometimes all you need is that little bit of a hook, so the little grit in the oyster that makes the pearl. And from there, that's enough to get you going and to go back as a reference point. And one thing that deepens characters, for me, it's a bit like developing a photograph. So when you first develop, you know, in the movies, and you can see the face, you can recognize, okay, we know that's Daniel. You leave it a bit longer, a bit more delicate, you get more shade, more definition. So it's through the revision and all the little choices that are made to reinforce that character in sort of almost subliminal ways. So, for example, I remember discussing with my editor, we think Hungry Paul would have a stubby pencil, you know, and that was just an instinct we had that he would have that. It wouldn't, you know.
Repeat what that is?
A stubby pencil. So in other words, a pencil that's worn down, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So there will be little details and just little behaviors, and also to round out a character. The important thing, because I use a sort of vignette style where there's different characters leading each chapter, to try and put them in different combinations. So you're seeing the character with different people. And in Hungry Paul's case, one of the ways I had to, when I never written a book before and I didn't know much about writing books, I thought, well, if it's a TV show or a play, you can tell the characters apart. You know, that character has a yellow hat, that guy has a beard. How do you get that into a book? And two things I sort of did was, one, different levels of interiority and different levels of backstory. So you don't really find much about Hungry Paul directly. It's sort of reflected through how his family talk about it. And whereas Grace, you do get more backstory. Leonard, you get a bit of his childhood, and then we skip through to adulthood. We don't find out how Leonard and Hungry Paul meet. We don't get the backstory of their friendship. So we don't know how long they're friends. So in that way, you're seeing a character, it's a bit like walking around a sculpture. You're seeing it from different angles, and allows you to sort of build up a sort of a more personal view of the character without really realizing it. So I like the characters to flower that way in a book, rather than designing them and then mechanically making them behave according to my design.
So I think I know the answer to this. So do you know how long Leonard and Hungry Paul have been friends?
No, I don't really. No. I think, and I think what I think one of the important things, I think, for any artist or writer or creative person is to decide how you want to frame your subject. So in the same way that when you look at a painting, a portrait, you don't know what color trousers the person is wearing. And the artist has just decided that's not what they're going to focus on. So you're always drawing the eye. And one thing that Leonard and Hungry Paul, from a sort of technical point of view, is I wanted to foreground human nature, particularly quite reserved aspects or easily missed aspects of human nature. So that meant paring back a lot of things and creating scenarios where you could see things that in a busier scene wouldn't be noticeable. So they're just little tricks. Most of these tricks I was unconsciously doing, and it's only through digesting the book and thinking about it.
You said that you hadn't been, you in a way you felt like you hadn't been prepared for writing, but you were already doing so much creativity with your music. And I'm just going to throw it out because somebody asked in chat, how do you feel like your musical background affected your writing?
I think because I've been playing music for so long, I had a very established relationship with my own creativity. So I'm comfortable with the lack of control involved. I'm comfortable with the spontaneity involved, and I don't panic if it slows down. So I know what the creative space feels like. So in that sense, I was used to, a lot of my songs were storytelling, so I struggled with structural issues and how to solve those, and the problem solving that goes into creativity. So I think it was helpful. And when I stopped playing music, I thought that I was done with creativity. And it took me about 5 years to realize that your creativity is not something you do, it's part of who you are. You know, I'm 45. It took me till I was 40 to really be comfortable calling myself an artist. I felt that sounded like a conceited term. I sort of thought I was putting myself apart from people. But I realized what being an artist means is that your creativity is as much part of your outlook as your sense of humor. So you can't decide, I'm not going to have a sense of humor, I'm too busy these days. Likewise, you say, well, I can't, my creativity, and what creativity really it comes down to is, I think, that your mind works in terms of resemblances the whole time. You see one thing in terms of another. That's why you resort to analogies and metaphors, and where you express an idea through characters. So moving from music to writing is a bit like if you only speak English and your concepts of language are very much built around the English language, and then suddenly you learn Spanish, and all of a sudden you can distinguish between the sort of psychology of expressing yourself and words compared to the form of the words. And when you switch forms, you can immediately see, oh, okay, this isn't one thing, it's two things. It's a creative energy and a form. They're different. So you don't try and solve a technical problem with an idea, and you don't try to solve an idea with a technical solution. So you sort of, by moving forward, a lot of writers do that. A lot of Irish writers anyway these days, there's a lot of writers I can think of who are also painters or who are also musicians or poets. And I think that movement through different forms is helpful in terms of developing yourself.
one of the things I wanted to say about it in terms of your training too is that you are, at least what I gathered from your Twitter feed, you're a voracious reader, and almost every person I know who teaches writing that's their first thing that they tell everybody. You know, it's always the first, read, write. You know, like keep writing, but also just read as much as you can. Read, and you know, it's okay to read people you want to be like. It's okay to, you know, and it feels like you picked up a lot of these lessons from your reading. Do you have a particular book that inspired you, or writer before?
I think it wasn't modeled, but I think one thing that's really helped my reading is I think when I came to understand that 95% of the world's population comes from countries where English is not the first language. And yet our reading tastes, because I'm from Ireland where English is the spoken language, our reading tastes are probably the other way, 95% Anglophone. And when I started reading from around the world, I realized that a lot of the narrative concepts around a narrative arc, for example, or that a story must be built around conflict, are Anglophone. So they're highly localized, and a lot of what is sort of taken as received wisdom is Anglophone wisdom. And just from reading broadly, and I don't study books in a way, I don't make notes, or I don't think I must remember that. I just let it wash through me and have whatever effect it's going to have. But I think certainly I do read a lot of literature from Japan, and I think that sort of non-conflict type of plotline, I think, seeped in without me knowing. It has a name called Kisho Tenketsu, but I didn't know that at the time. And I think that sort of structure, where it's more like a poem, you know, where you don't expect a poem to necessarily, you know, bring it to a crisis and then resolve it. You just brings you to a different place. And I think I like that sort of structure. And when I'm writing, I just want to see, you know, life change in front of me, to experience life changing, and that's what I try, and that's what I enjoy writing about. You asked me, have I a particular writer in mind? There wasn't a particular writer or voice that I had in mind for Leonard and Hungary Paul, but I'm always interested to hear what it isn't a book that has been compared too much. You know, sometimes it's helpful for people to say, well, if you like this, you like that. There hasn't been a particular name that keeps cropping up, which I think is interesting. And I wonder, will readers in the US pick up a different sense of it than readers maybe in the UK? I'll be interested to see what happens.
Well, we will see. It's typical, you know, as you said, it's a word of mouth kind of book that moves from person to person. So we'll have, we're still in the process of trying to capture comparisons and what resonates. There is one book that was sort of influential in your publishing journey. You're published by Blue Moose in Ireland, an independent, and you have a story about how you know, how you got published, and a bit unusual, actually.
Yeah, the Blue Moose are actually from the UK. They're in West Yorkshire. They're sort of in Hebden Bridge. They run a husband and wife team who work out of a small mining college, ex-mining college in West Yorkshire, instead of where Ted Hughes is from, around that sort of neck of the woods. And when I was working on Leonard and Hungary Paul, I really didn't think it would be published. And not because I didn't believe in the project, I just didn't see how it fit into the sort of elevator pitch world that I understood publishing to be. And then I read a book called Man with a Seagull on His Head by an English writer called Harriet Page. And it was similar, I felt it was from a similar solar system to Leonard and Hungary Paul. It had, you know, quiet characters, it was odd, but it worked. And I felt it was sincere. And so I decided, you know, if I really had the chance, I really wanted to work with Blue Moose. Now, having said that, if the only company who would, you know, publish it was like a rat poison company, I would have gone with the rat poison company. But as it happened, Blue Moose, they were the first people I sent it to. I sent the email on the first 3 chapters late on a Friday evening. And the publisher, Kevin Duffy, who has dogs, gets up early. So he read it and at 7 a.m. the next morning said, can you send me the rest of it? So I sent it to him. And then about a week later, I was in a bookshop and I got an email from him telling me a mini review of the book, basically, and saying, we'd love to publish it. And a few days later, signed a contract and we've got on very well since then. It was a very good match. And I know that sounds like a lottery win, and in a way it is, but I'm not sure who else would have published it had he not taken up it, because it wasn't an obvious success. But it's been their biggest selling book so far. But I have another book coming out with Blue News this summer, and then I'm doing another book in a couple of years' time. Doing 3 books with them.
Yes, we had a couple of questions asking about Panenka, which is the next book. And then you actually did mention in another interview that you've already got your next book done. Each one sounds very different. Do you think there's a through line through your stories, or do you want to mention and tease people? Maybe they'll pre-order. I don't know if Melville House is doing
them. Panenka is a very different type of book. I have a copy of it here, so I mean, that's what it looks like. So that's out this May. I haven't written the next one, although I sketched it in my head. It won't be out for another couple of years, called Ghost Mountain. Panenka is a different type of book. It's a sadder book. It's a book about life's unfixability. And what do you do? How do people with broken hearts still find a path through life? And I think it's quite a different book to Leonard and Hungary Paul, but it's very interesting to me as a new writer, as people read Panenka. People are just reading promotional proof copies now. It hasn't been published yet. But when you publish one book, people talk about the book. When you publish 2 books, people start talking more about the writer. I didn't expect that. So people are noticing things I'm interested in, common themes. And I think the themes of family are there. There's also, I think, a common, there is a sincerity there. I believe in people. And I think I'm also, in both books, I'm interested in not just observing the world and critiquing it and saying what I don't like. I'm interested in saying, okay, I get it, the world's imperfect, people are imperfect, but is there a path through life? You know, is there a way of being in the world and of staying in the world that's possible? Can I picture that? And both books do that. So hopefully not in a sort of contrived, let's all forget about the world's complications and just give a distraction, but in a way that feels like it belongs in life. And so both books have that, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's something, that people really love in Leonard and Hungary Paul, like this kind of way, like sort of leading towards a way of living in the world. I'm wondering how many hundreds of people said to you, did you read Quiet by Susan Cain, which has been a bit of a nonfiction phenomenon for the past few years, sort of celebrating the introvert. Does that come up much?
I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it. I've never been asked that question, believe it or not.
In the United States. And that's immediately, I don't know if it was a world hit, but it's this kind of book that basically celebrates a nonfiction book that sort of celebrates the Leonard and Hungary Pauls of the world. So now the spotlight is on, and maybe the 3rd or 4th time you'll say, okay, I'll go look at that somewhere. So many people are writing saying, why Hungry Paul? Why Hungry Paul? Why Hungry Paul?
Okay, let's get this over with. The first thing I will say is only the narrator calls him Hungry Paul. None of the characters call him. In fact, none of them refer to him by name at all in the book. The reason why I chose Hungry Paul, well, there's kind of a basic, ordinary reason, and then there's more sort of writerly reasons. Basic one, my wife has an uncle who's a bus driver, who has 2 friends, Tall Paul and Hungry Paul. And every time I told people that, they laughed. So the back of my mind, I said, if I ever do a story, I should put a character Hungry Paul in. And then I began to think it works quite well because it's a descriptor that's not a descriptor. You would never say, I want you to meet my husband, he's very hungry. So it doesn't tell you a huge amount about him. And I like the fact that, the book itself, it kind of just signifies or marks him as somebody who's a little bit different or a bit special in the book. And in that sense, you sort of casually just refer to these. So initially it's like, he's called Hungry Paul. Is he going to be overweight? Is he going to eat? Is there going to be some big reveal around Hungry Paul? And after a while, I think you just read Hungry Paul as if his name was, you know, Peter, John, whatever. So it just becomes a name. And it sort of stands in contrast to an overall deliberate thing in the book, which is a sort of signlessness. So there are no surnames. There are no place names. It's supposed to feel not far from here and now, wherever that is for you. There aren't that many physical descriptions. We don't get, you know, there aren't all sorts of labels that you might find that would let the reader take a shortcut. They're not there, because the reader is just being encouraged to observe human nature without those shortcuts. So there was a certain pleasure in a book that removes all the signs, to smack a big label on the main character, and a label that was not really that helpful. But so it's not a puzzle, or there isn't a particular reveal that's hidden in there or anything like that. That's my logic for it.
It's a big thing to like, because it's probably the unplaciest Irish novel I've ever read, you know, and it is very deliberate. But I'm curious, like, did you know from the very beginning that it was, you know, you did everything but the thing that a lot of writers do, which is not give the characters any names at all? There was a Hungry might have been his only name, you know, in some of these books, but you did really take all that out. Was any of it in there at all during the writing process, or did you know right away that you wouldn't have the descriptors and the places and that kind of thing?
I knew if anything that was there was inadvertent. So, for example, there were a few Irishisms in there that would have immediately located it in Ireland, but I wasn't even aware that they were unusual for Ireland. So one of the processes we went through in editing was to identify those, not to try and disguise the Irishness, but just to try and avoid a default of placing it in Ireland. And there's only one that survives, and that's a reference to the dog having a tongue like a rasher. Now, yeah, a rasher, in the States you call bacon, right? So in Ireland, bacon is boiled pig meat, which is about the size and thickness of the palm of your hand. In the UK, they would use a rasher of bacon. And at one stage, my editor, we went back and forth. And there is actually, I think, a Bacon Today magazine done in the US, where we were going back and forth as what do they call it in different parts of the country. And there is no, all the names for bacon have national associations. That's the only one that survived. But there were other references. And really, it was just to try and make sure that inadvertently the reader didn't drop into a location. And it's something that Panenka plays with even further, because that's a very specific location, but it's not named, and it could be in any number of places across Europe. So it really, and I also published a short story, which I actually describe as a novel. It's a 2005 word novel called The Translators Funeral. And again, you know, there are no named characters in that. They're referred to by their occupation, and there's no location. So it's just something. Perhaps it gives it a slightly fairy tale characteristic, not to sort of locate it specifically. Also, I'm from Dublin, and Dublin's a big character to put in a book. So if you put Dublin in, you're dealing with a character who's been in some big books and done very, very well. And I just felt doing that would dominate the book. So I didn't want to do it.
Yeah. I was just looking, I have a lot of my own questions, but I have a lot of questions here. Somebody asked about the cover, and of course you don't have any control over the cover, but there certainly is some repeating symbolism of the fish on the cover. Did you know what you wanted? I mean, you probably, for Blue Moose, you probably did have more say in a cover than say you would if you had gone to a larger publisher right away.
Oh yeah, and one of the reasons I liked Blue Moose was the artwork was always excellent. So we had looked at it, I was sent a few designs, and none of them really struck me as you know, unique enough. And so, in fairness to Blue Moose, they said to me, if you're not happy, we're not happy. So you come back. So I tried to think, what's the one image that encapsulates what I'm trying to get across in the book? What's the passage? And the passage I landed on was the sunfish passage. And so, which is where Hungry Paul's mother and father, going back to before they had children, going back to when they're at an aquarium, and she picks the sunfish as her favorite fish. If you've ever seen a sunfish, so a sea sunfish, so mola mola, it's a very big, flat, kind of slightly gawking looking fish. It's not a very attractive or dynamic fish at all. It just floats in the ocean and eats any jellyfish to go by. And she picked it as her favorite, and she picked it as her favorite because she knew nobody else would pick it. And it pained her heart to think that there could be something going unloved in the world. And Hungry Paul was her sunfish. And I've actually had some quite emotional messages from various people, you know, parents and mothers in particular, about how they read that and they said, oh, I realized my son's a sunfish. And so I wanted that image, and I wanted a yellow book. For some reason, a synesthesia reason, I just thought it felt like a yellow book. And I thought keeping it simple would be keeping with the simplicity of the book. And that, sorry, this is the cover when I say yellow, this is the one I'm talking about. So I thought, well, Leonard writes encyclopedias, maybe something that looks a bit like a sort of child's book, you know, or, you know, a child textbook or something like that. And so that's how the yellow cover came in. And then when Melville House came on, we had a discussion back and forth, and they, you know, we agreed that they wanted to keep the sunfish, but I think they wanted to bring out a different side to the book, maybe a more playful side to the book, and so they went with the image that you guys will see over there, and the paperback image plays on that as well.
Yeah, but one of the weird things about publishing is there are these weird color tropes, and many popular funny books are either light blue or aqua. We don't know why. We don't know if there's any significance, but it just keeps happening that these books take off, like Where'd You Go, Bernadette, and the Andrew Sean Greer book that won the Pulitzer Prize. And, you know, it's just like you just see that color over and over again for funny books. So I love the Scrabble tiles, which I know are going away in the paperback, because the games that they play are just so important in the book. So that's why one of the reasons when they said, well, do you want to wait for the paperback? And I'm like, no, the Scrabble tiles. I wanted to ask you about a couple of the scenes, and without giving anything away, I can just say a setup. One of the things that people just go crazy for, and when I just started sputtering, is the contest that Hungry Paul enters, the civic contest to, well, I don't think I'm giving anything away. There's a contest for a new way to close a letter. Has anyone ever done anything like that? Where did you come up with that?
Well, I suppose that was just me being playful and just enjoying it and sort of thinking, you know, one of the things that I think about kind people in the world, one of the things they do is just find something they can do and offer it to other people, whatever it is. And I just wanted some little incident, and in a way also a bit of a red herring, you know, that it doesn't really, okay, it slightly opens the door for what Hungry Paul does next, but it was really just a bit of playfulness, a bit of humor, and a bit of, I suppose it's part of that, the sort of humor in the book, which is taking something humorous and treating it quite soberly, you know, with great seriousness, that this was a real problem, and this solution then is, I get a lot of emails with that solution.
Yeah, I think another image that people keep talking about is Leonard's first date with Shelley, where they start out at McDonald's. Gosh, people just love that so much. The passage, I think it really sets up their interaction so well. And I think the sort of way that people make assumptions about people based on very little information, which I think seems to be a theme in the book, you know, a bit.
Yeah, I think certainly what I wanted to show was, you know, that Leonard is actually trying to be in the world, you know, and I sort of thought, actually, I don't know whether it's the same in the US, but in Ireland, if you said there's this guy, he's in his 30s and he lives at home with his mother, people would say, that's all I need to know. I don't need to know anything else. He lacks any sort of initiative. He's going to wait it out. When his mother passes away, he'll still be in that house. He'll do nothing to the house. And in Ireland, people have such a obsession with property that, you know, there'd be a lot of judgment about someone like that. And it's interesting, the book is now being translated into Italian. And it was interesting, somebody was talking to me, an Italian person was saying that there's a huge issue in Italy and discussion about people staying at home into their 30s. So they felt the book would get a very interesting reaction there. So it's a very topical issue there about adult children at home. But yeah, I suppose those signs, like I said, all of the characters, not just Leonard and Hungry Paul, including Helen and Peter and Grace, they're all people who've developed a coping mechanism for being in the world. And there's just a gentle disruption of that. And it shows how they adjust and they find a new way of coping. They have to come out of their coping mechanisms. And it's that adjustment which the book sort of shows how they each make that change. And I suppose the strength of somebody like Hungry Paul is that he you know, when there's a lot of, like at the moment in the world, you know, in the States politically, it's been a very strange time, you know, with coronavirus around the world. At a time of change like that, it's very easy to overlook what's not changing, to overlook what's perennial. And what Hungry Paul, he's a limited number of things going for him, but one of those is that he always values what doesn't change. Not that he's stuck in his ways, but he can't move. And actually, he finds change really easy. When things change in the book, he goes with it because he actually has a spontaneity to him. But just he's not racing around trying to impose himself on the world. You know, he has the sort of Hippocratic view, as he says, to do no harm. So I think those scenes are examples of the characters venturing into the world.
Oh yeah, I love the relationship of Shelley and Patrick. It actually, and you should know before you say anything, is that the author has come to the store like 3 times, and I'm a big fan. But it reminded me a little of Chris Cleave in his way that he writes adults and kids together, which I think is one of his strongest things. So I'm saying that in a very, very positive way, but I really love the relationship. I love, you know, as a bookseller, I love Leonard's job as a ghostwriter for children's books. I know actually a lot of authors, a lot of fiction writers ghostwrite adult books. We actually had a customer who wrote this crazy popular investment guide ghost wrote that actually came crashing down when it turned out the numbers were fudged, which she was the only innocent party involved, by the way. But I don't know how did you come up with that position? And I love the way he's, you know, turns out to be this kid's favorite writer in a way, you know. I love it.
Well, thank you. I suppose I wrote at night. I wrote the book 6 nights a week for 3 months. I got the first draft done. So I started at 10 p.m. in the evening, worked till midnight.
You have a job and you have 2 kids.
Yeah. So I would start my writing at 10 p.m., write for 2.5 hours, and do that 6 nights a week for 3 months. And that's how I got the first draft. I took a month off and then went back, another 3 months editing, month off, back. So I sat down at my kitchen table, and what was I surrounded by? You know, my kids are now 10 and 12. So, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, they were, you know, 6 and 8. I was surrounded by board games, surrounded by children's encyclopedias. Children's encyclopedias, I'd read to them 1 million times. and I had sort of thought about who wrote the stuff. This one's really good, and this one is rubbish. You know, there is a gift to this. You know, there is a gift to describing, you know, how a volcano, how Pompeii got preserved. There's a gift to describing it, and I started to notice that there was a lot of sort of almost surreptitious personality in the books, and it led me just to wonder that, and I also in books, and Panenka has that. This one of the central relationships is between Panenka and his grandson, and I like books where there's a spread of ages in the characters. You know, if the characters are all in their 30s or all in their 40s, I sort of get a little bit frustrated. And I like a book where you can have characters 7, and also that the older characters, you know, Peter and Helen and Barbara are you know, have a life, and they're not just mannequins in the book. So I just like drawing on what's around me, and those ideas I would have been thinking for like 6 or 7 years about who writes these books, what kind of people. I probably passed them in the street, and that stuff just kind of ferments there, and you just pick on it then when you want to come up with some detail. But it worked out to be quite a good hook in terms of building Leonard's personality around it, and the continuity with his childhood as someone who liked factual books, and that became, you know, something part of his life. Even in his discussion with Shelley, they talked about that.
I don't want to talk down Hungry Paul's very important job as a casual substitute mail carrier, which as a person who has to now take, under COVID, I go to the post office every day, and my best buddies are Miles, Jennifer, and Dan, who help me take in boxes and packages every day. And I thought, I've also known a number of mail carriers. I have one of my former colleagues has basically made a career of changing. She changed jobs a lot when she was young, but now she just changes her route over and over again. So I just I did love this idea that a full-time carrier, too much.
Well, I did that job when I was a student. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a little tiny piece of you in the book.
Oh, he is. No, my father was a postman. I have 2 brothers who are postmen, the mailmen, as you'd say, and 2 of my sisters married mailmen. So when I was a student,
that's a lot.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, I couldn't leave it out then, having had such a family connection. So yeah, when I was a student, one of my jobs was on Mondays. People get hungover watching a football match on Sunday, and they'd be hungover on Monday. So I'd get a call at 7 o'clock, come in, and all the real mailmen would have been in from 5 and 6. They'd all come and gone, and so you'd go in, and they wouldn't even tell you where you were going. They tell you your starting point, and after that, you just had to figure it out. So that was something I just drew on. I just thought, you know what, that's a very Hungry Paul-esque job. Why don't we put him in that? And you know, the idea, he kind of saw himself as like one of the small stamps that just makes up the balance on a larger package, and that sort of fit his non-competitive view of the world. You know.
Let's see. We've got a number of questions. I want to hit some of them. I did someone asked a little about download your music. Somebody else sent a link that I sent out to everybody with it. I do know you are a voracious reader. I'd love to know, maybe even some of them came out in the United States. I know there's actually often a lag with publication, especially for new writers. Anything you've been particularly enthusiastic about of late?
One thing I've just finished, and it was published first in the States, so you'll be able to find it, is this collection, Betty Howland, Blue in Chicago. Published originally in 1978, republished last year. It's published by Picador here. I'm trying to remember the name. A particular publisher in the US had rediscovered it and republished it. Who deserve all the credit. Actually, I'll tell you who it is. They're called A Public Space magazine. And that is one of the best short story collections and contains one of the best novellas I've ever read. That is a fantastic collection, Betty Howland. So I really enjoyed that. In January,
I'm finding a book that we have on our shelves called W3.
That's a memoir. Yeah, that's only just coming out here now, but that's you should read that. Yeah,
Okay.
I've ordered that actually, or I've been told actually I'm on a proof list for that because it's coming out. So I really can't wait. But she's a world-class writer, no doubt about it. I spent January, one thing I've done for the last couple of years is do Japanuary. So I spent January reading Japanese literature. And in particular, I focused on a lot of 20th century female writers, many of whom are going out of print now. But actually a lot of them I get through the States because they were published by Kodansha over in the States.
Oh, sure.
And also some of the university presses in the States were very good at publishing translation for the 20th century, so that's where available. So really enjoyed, I think the highlights for me probably were At the End of Summer by Harumi Satoshi. I also really enjoyed The Sound of the Mountain by Yasunari Kawabata, who was Nobel Prize winner, first Nobel Prize winner from Japan. But I read from around the world. I'm trying to think who might be in the US. Like I like modern Japanese writers, Miko Kawakami, Breast and Eggs, which came out in the US last year.
I went through a whole I saw you had read Banana Yoshimoto, and I didn't read what you thought of it, but I went through a Banana Yoshimoto craze and read like 5 in a row at one point. Unfortunately, the only book on your Japanuary list that I read you didn't like, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Oh, which one was the Before the Coffee Gets Cold?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people like that. A lot of people recommended that to me, but I didn't
work for you.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that book my buyer recommended to me, and I read it, and we sold a lot at Christmas. And at first we were like the top indie in the store in the country, but you can see that it's got this word of mouth that's taking off. There's this whole series of books that are sort of like these philosophical fiction books. You're in that subplot of that a little, but the one that just exploded big is Midnight Library, another British writer. So he's like 3 on the New York Times list, and it took about 3 or 4 months for him to get that high. And I think it's people who read human potential nonfiction who kind of gravitate to these kind of stories. So they don't really, so it really works for them in a different way than maybe someone else who reads fiction.
Yeah.
I also feel like multiverse books are very hot here, and I think that's the influence of movies and things, comic books. But people are really fascinated with alternative lives and physics, and actually, 2 or 3 of the biggest books that we've had in the science category have been multiverse books. So, there's always, I read this column called Number Ones about music, which is based on a British column. And he's like, there's always, when something gets really big, there's always a reason beyond the book or the song. And I think that's true for books too. So
yeah, like even Leonard and Hungary Paul, like as I say, like it didn't have any marketing budget or any advertising whatsoever. It just became like your experience, what you were saying with your shop, that one reader read it. And I kind of think it's like is it a Rube Goldberg machine, they call it, where you have like a chicken lays an egg and then that goes down and then a gun shoots a balloon and then that tips a glass of water. So one bizarre event leads to another, which just keeps the book. Like the book in the UK has been out for 2 years now, and it's still selling more than it ever did. And it's not in massive numbers, but for independent publishing terms, it just keeps going. And I think part of it is because there are a lot of people in the book world, there are a lot of people in life who are gentle and who are really important to the people who know them and to society, and don't really get recognized in a world where we value quite strong voices. So and I think it's exactly as you say, that's partly because they like the book, but also there was something there anyway that was ready to receive it.
I've been selling books for 35 years. And it's one of these things where and I used to work for a multi-store, so I'd have all these people selling books for me, and you look for these sort of books that appeal, like different kinds of readers would like. And, I'd call them sticky, which is sort of the definition in the pop psychology world. And this, and some of the books would jump to the idea is to get the book if I'm enthusiastic and I think it works, like get other stores enthusiastic about it too. And sometimes it happens and the book, and finally somebody at Costco or Barnes and Noble or Amazon, you know, takes hold of the book, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's too complicated, like books in translation are a little tougher, though A Man Called Ove did it, you know, and this just feels like that book. And I just feel like if it just gets the right readers, so I actually wrote a blog piece where I was like more appealing to other bookstores, like, or telling people today, like if you're not local, go to your local bookstore and either tell them to read it or just gift them a copy. Let them borrow your copy. I tell people I don't like borrowing other people's books. So maybe you should buy a book from them, which is a nice thing for them, and then just give it to the bookseller that you talk to all the time, because they'll fall in love with it and they'll sell another 50 copies. So one last thing, one person said, and this is one of the most beautiful passages. Faye wrote that she loves the passage where everyone has an invisible number on their forehead, which is the number of times we'll see them again. What gave you that idea, and what did you?
Well, it just came to, I've had experience, like I've lost people in my life. I suppose my father died when I was 7. You know, my mother died 14 years ago. And so I've learned from quite a young age. And actually, one of the reasons I like Banana Yoshimoto is she deals very well with people who suffer grief at a young age and carry it with them. It has a weird effect on you. It kind of makes you older before your time, but also keeps you forever young. It's kind of a strange thing. And that is always, and not in a morbid way, but in a sort of appreciating people way. I've always been conscious that my time is limited and other people's time is limited. And ultimately, unfortunately, you have to let everyone go. And when I sort of thought about how to articulate that idea of a number, and I say it could be a big number. You can only see somebody 1,000 times. You know, if you could see the number and you knew it was 1,000, it might make a little bit of a difference when you're seeing them for the 999th, the 998. And it's part of the reality of life, but it's also about, you know, appreciating things at the time. That's the point about that. But the character who says that is somebody who has learned it in retrospect, and you know, that's one thing about wisdom. It's you often learn it too late. But so that's a message he's trying to pass on.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say one more compliment from Susie, who wrote, "Your descriptive writing made me feel like I was in the room with Leonard and Hungry Paul. I love how they live in the moment," which is something that I have been thinking about a lot of the books that I like, which also plays into the previous comment. And then she, of course, asked why at Hungry Paul. So, but that's the ending to like 50% of the question. So, by the way.
I don't mind answering that question.
Let me just say, it was a good idea. It really obsesses people. We are just about at an hour, and I think I've gone through. I just want to make sure I hit. Oh, I have to. Yes, Nancy. He does have a follow-up on his way. Nancy has been one of my former colleagues who has been helping spread the word about your book. The two people who introduced me to the book were also former colleagues, John and Rebecca. Rebecca's become a big champion. Both of them were. This is the thing. It's so interesting to see. Like, you know, they're like, all right, I'm going to help sell this book too. I'm going to get people to this event. They're going to be, you know, it is. I don't want to say it's like a cult or anything, but what's a positive cult called? I don't know. But
a movement.
Yeah, movement. There you go. It's a movement. Anyway, we are so grateful that you took some time out for us. I hope this is the first of many, many, many more virtual American events. So as another Susie wrote to me after I convinced her to add on her book to our web order, she said, "This is the book that we need right now." So.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Daniel. Thank you to everyone for watching and for all your questions. And you can find me on Twitter if you want to. If I didn't get to answer your question and you want to ask me, please do drop me a line, and I'm always very happy to engage with readers anytime.
I've heard you're quite engaging. That's one of my, because I'm not on social media too much, but in fact, like at all. Somebody else does our Twitter in the store, but one of my customers came back to me and said, "Oh yeah, we've been going back and forth and chatting." So, congrats, which is cool. So it's another option for people. Thank you all. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you, virtual or otherwise. Celtic MKE. Let's have. I'm going to have Patrick come back on and say a good afternoon as well, or maybe not.
I'm technologically not too great either, obviously, but enjoyed it very much. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rónán, for just a marvelous hour. Enjoyed it, and looking forward to your next book, and Daniel, in your case, looking forward to your next Irish author.
Yes.
Both again.
Very cool. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Patrick. Thank you.